Welcome to 5 Minutes with interviews for Biodiverse Anthropocenes program. Today we have a university lecturer of Arctic and Northern History, Ritva Kylli. Welcome, Ritva.
Thank you so much.
Can you start by talking about your research?
Yes, of course. As you mentioned, I work here as a university lecturer of Arctic and Northern History, so that tells something I do here at the university. I've been researching these Arctic themes, like history of Sami people and other Arctic indigenous peoples, like over 20 years now. And right now I'm mostly concentrating on the environmental history of the Sami people and other Arctic indigenous peoples. So that's something I do right now. But in addition to that, I'm also a researcher of food history, and I've written this book about Finland's food history. It's Suomen ruokahistoria in Finnish. It was published last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The publisher was Kaudeamus, and I brought this book with me because I'm really excited about it. I wanted to show it here, so I'm writing here about history of eating and food, but in addition to that, for example, about history of food production and food access and availability and things like that. It's really large, and there are many centuries. And I'm especially interested in the history of 18th and 19th centuries.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work and how it's connected to Biodiverse Anthropocenes program?
I'm interested in things just like sustainability, and I think food is very fundamental when we think about these themes.
I think that I'm actually quite curious about your research here about food is really the connection to the environment and what you've been doing with that kind of research. And I know that one of the chapters is about berries, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the production and how it started, and you know what you discovered in the research.
Yes, I've written a chapter about wild berries and the history of picking them, and it's very interesting because there are so many similar themes like we are having now when we are talking about or discussing about this berry picking in the newspapers or things like that. People were worried already during the 19th century that, oh my God, why doesn't anybody want to go to the forest and pick these berries? And I'm very interested in berries as an edible natural resource, and it's something I'm going to do more during the next years to study them even more thoroughly.
Yeah.
And they have been very important food for the Sami people and other indigenous peoples in the Arctic because they have had a high vitamin content, and there have been not so many sources for the vitamin C, for example.
And so maybe one more question about your book is really about changes and more recent changes, given that when we think about the Anthropocenes, one of the criticism is that it really started with industrialization and then how our relations with the environment changed. So in relation to food practices and eating, what did you notice that was mostly affected?
It was started to be very industrialization during the early 20th century in Finland, and it was very late because we have had all these berries around us for such a long time, but people really appreciated more more imported fruit, for example, like oranges and pineapples and bananas. So I guess these wild berries, they were too close to Finnish people. So people didn't really appreciate anything that was so close to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. And now the new turn into making the berries a superfood.
Yes. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yes, and when the vitamins were discovered during the 1910 or something like that, so after that people started to talk a lot about berries and fruit, but even in that point people were mostly interested in oranges and important fruits. So it was really funny that even then Finnish people didn't realize how great it is that we have lingon berries and blackberries and many kind of wild berries around us.
That's really interesting. Unfortunately, we need to wrap up, but thank you very much. And thanks everyone for watching. See you next month.